President-elect Trump is going to be inheriting the worst fiscal situation of any president as judged by the debt relative to the economy, other than President Truman when he's walking into office. So he's got a tough starting point. He spent a lot of time on the campaign talking about the importance of getting that $20 trillion debt back down.
And that's where we'll pick it up with that very woman, Maya MacGuineas. She is the president of the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. I watched you on Face the Nation, Maya. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So you said that it's the worst condition of our economy as it relates to the debt, correct?
Yeah, let me explain exactly what I was saying. So the situation that President-elect Trump is inheriting in terms of our debt compared to the economy, which is the highest levels that we've ever seen since Truman. That's different than saying the economy's the worst it's been. The economy's actually been, that's kind of a complicated question, but the economy's been recovering. And there are a lot of good signs about the economy. But in order to have gotten us here over the past 8 years, we've had a huge amount of borrowing that has put our debt levels at twice the average of what they've been historically relative to the economy. And that means when the new president comes in, he has to really think about policies that are going to get our debt back under control.
So when you want to get our debt under control, how do you do that and still guard and still have $1 trillion infrastructure project?
You pay for it. I mean, that's one of the things that was never discussed in its entire campaign by Donald Trump, which is how you pay for things. He has a lot of items on his agenda, from tax cuts to infrastructure spending to more spending on defense. I think the new president gets to come up with his or her own agenda. They get to figure out what they want to do, but they can't do it in a way that says, don't worry about the costs. We're just going to tap all that onto the national debt, particularly when the debt is already at post-wartime records. You need to figure out how you're going to pay for it. So if you want to spend more, you have to spend less somewhere else, or you have to raise taxes, which I don't think the Republican Senate, House, and White House are interested in doing.
So you have
to talk about spending cuts.
If you had your druthers and I gave you our tax reform and I put it on your desk, if growth is the key and paying down the debt is the focus, what would you do with taxes?
Great question. So I would focus on reforming taxes. Our tax code, both business and individual, is a disaster. But I would not have less revenues at this time because our debt is just too high. I would reform the tax code, and I would get rid of a lot of we have $1 trillion in tax breaks a year. I would get rid of a lot of those in order to bring rates down, help grow the economy, and actually get more revenue to help deal with the debt. And on the spending side, I would look at reforming entitlements. One of the missing issues of the entire campaign was we have an aging population, we have growing health care costs, still growing faster than the economy, and we did not talk seriously about how to deal with Medicare and Social Security, which have to be addressed, or the people who depend on those programs will be harmed, and they'll continue to squeeze out the rest of the budget.
So you would like to see in tax reform Social Security reform, or is that going to be separate?
No, that's separate. So I would like to see tax reform and entitlement reform. On the tax reform piece, I would like to really focus on broadening the base, bringing down the rates, but not thinking about tax cuts. You can't afford them until we have the debt under control. Thinking about tax reform to help grow the economy. That would be my objective.
Do you believe that the economy would shrink if we paid for the infrastructure with deficit spending?
I believe that you would have a long-term growth plan. There's a difference between a short-term sugar high, which may be what we're talking about now. Borrow a lot of money, gin up growth for a couple years, and then after that sugar high, you have a crash. I don't want to see us do that. I want a strategy in this country which looks at tax reform, smarter spending than we currently have, and getting our debt under control. And I think that's how you grow the economy in a sustained way, which is what we should be shooting for.
So do you hear any of that coming out of the new president-elect?
Not yet, because I haven't heard anything about offsetting all the massive costs. We looked at his promises during the campaign, and one good thing is that he showed a real openness to changing those policies and making changes along the way. But what he put forth would have added over $5 trillion to the national debt, on top of the fact that we're supposed to be borrowing $9 trillion over the next 10 years if we do nothing. That's unsustainable.
What are the greatest takers from the economy right now? What entitlements in particular? Is it Medicare as well as Social Security?
Well, interestingly, the fastest growing part of the budget is interest, and that shows you that our deficits and our debt are already affecting our budget dramatically. But after that, the biggest growth will be in health care costs, and then Social Security will have a real growth spurt when the baby boomers continue to retire. So we have to get control of that as quickly as possible. But the biggest problems we face aging of the society. We knew this was coming. We knew we were all living longer, and we didn't make adjustments to our entitlement program. And healthcare costs that did slow in recent years, but are still growing faster than the economy. And if something's growing faster than the economy, it's by definition squeezing something else out. But I think the real problem was that throughout the campaign, we didn't talk about hard choices. You can't borrow your way to prosperity. There is no free lunch out there. We're going to hear promises about astronomical growth levels that just are not going to be sustainable, that aren't going to be achievable in any long sustained way. And we need to have a real discussion about what our national priorities are. If we want to do it, how are we going to pay for it? And how we're going to deal with the fact that we borrowed too much for so many years now, right, and we're going to have to bring that mountain of debt back down.
I know. Also,
that's part of growth.
Yeah, that should be happening right now, and we'll just see if the high that the stock market's on will transfer to the rest of the economy. Real quick, Maya, do you understand why the stock market's soaring?
Well, I think there's a lot of optimism in the short term about kind of that sugar high I was talking about. If we have a lot of stimulus from unpaid for tax cuts, unpaid for infrastructure spending, that could pop up the economy in the short term, but it's almost bubble hopping. We've had housing market bubbles and tech bubbles and borrowing bubbles. When they pop, that won't be good for the economy at all.
Maya MacGuineas, thanks so much. I definitely have to have you on as we get more details on the infrastructure program. Thank you very much for your insight. Megyn Kelly next, live.